Hello everyone, and welcome to Background Interview, the show that keeps you company on your commute, in your kitchen while cooking, or even during your workout. I'm Lily, and it's an absolute joy to have you with us today. We promise an engaging, entertaining, and enriching experience, perfect for listening in, however busy you may be. Thank you for that warm welcome. I just got back from a little weekend adventure, attempting to bake a triple chocolate cake. It turns out I'm slightly better at hosting a show than I am at following a recipe. The chocolate fiasco ended up in such a state that my oven looked like a chocolate volcano erupted. My smoke detector and I had a rather intense conversation. Anyway, enough about my questionable cooking skills. Today's guest needs no introduction, but I'll introduce him anyway, because I'm just that polite. You know him from one of the most iconic novellas ever penned. A writer, essayist, poet, and traveler, whose rich imagination gave us tales of mystery, adventure, and the dual nature of the human psyche. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in giving a huge welcome to our distinguished guest tonight.
Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much for the warm reception.
Please, let's both take our seats. Now, I'm sure our listeners would love to hear more about who you are, in your own words. So, would you kindly introduce yourself?
Indeed. Greetings, I am Robert Louis Stevenson, born in 1850 in Edinburgh, Scotland. For much of my life, I was quite frail in health, yet my mind roamed ceaselessly through worlds of adventure and imagination. I ventured far from my homeland, wrote novels, poetry, and essays, and I indulged a lifelong passion for exploring the unknown, both in the world and within the human spirit.
I must say, it is an absolute honor to have such a remarkable literary figure on our show. Did you folks know that Mr. Stevenson once embarked on lengthy travels, braving the elements in pursuit of experiences that later shaped his stories? Talk about dedication to craft.
Your compliment humbles me. I confess I've always had a taste for travel and adventure. Without it, I doubt I would have written the stories that I did. Adventure and curiosity have been the twin engines driving my work.
We certainly see that spirit in your writing. Now, we have a lot to cover: your upbringing, your family life, your struggles, your big life-changing moments, and most importantly, your masterpiece, Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But let's start at the beginning. Tell us a bit about your childhood in Edinburgh.
I was born into a family of lighthouse engineers. My father, Thomas Stevenson, came from a line of distinguished men who built lighthouses around the coasts of Scotland. It was rather expected I would follow in those footsteps, but from a very young age, I felt a calling toward literature. Even as a child, I struggled with ill health, often confined to bed. I'd amuse myself by reading voraciously or spinning fantastical yarns in my imagination. I wrote my first essays and stories practically in the nursery, I might add, with my nanny gently scolding me to rest.
So, in a sense, your health challenges, though difficult, afforded you time to cultivate your literary imagination. How did your family react to your choice of becoming a writer?
It was a tumultuous journey. My father wished me to become an engineer, and when that didn't happen, he hoped I'd study law. Although I did complete my law degree, the lure of pen and ink was too strong. My parents were not always thrilled with my unconventional path, but over time, they came to appreciate my work. Perhaps they realized I was determined to walk a road all my own.
I find that perseverance quite inspiring, and I'm sure our audience does too. It's not easy to deviate from familial expectations, especially in the 19th century. Now, let's chat about your personal relationships. Did you have a strong circle of literary friends or mentors that shaped your worldview?
Yes, indeed. I formed meaningful friendships with fellow writers, travelers, and intellectuals. Even though my health often kept me indoors, the conversation in our parlor was lively and thought-provoking. One crucial influence was my father, ironically enough. His unwavering sense of moral duty informed my sense of the moral tensions that color so many of my stories. Of course, later in life, I married Fanny Vandergrift Osborne, an American. She was a tremendous source of companionship and strength for me.
It's wonderful to hear how personal influences shaped the writer you became. Were there any notable failures or stumbles that, in hindsight, propelled you toward a critical turning point in your life?
Undoubtedly. My health was an ever-present obstacle. I would frequently travel to find climates that might alleviate my ailments: France, the Swiss Alps, and eventually the South Pacific. Each time, I risked financial insecurity, as well as physical strain. There was a time in California when I was nearly penniless, uncertain if I'd be able to continue writing. Yet those low moments distilled in me a resolve. They made each success sweeter, like the acceptance of my early essays, or the positive reception to Treasure Island. These experiences also profoundly shaped my perspective on human endurance and resilience.
It's amazing how resilience, shaped by real challenges, can shine through an author's work. Now, I'd love to pivot to your masterpiece, Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. For all the folks out there listening, we're diving into the dark and captivating world of dual identity, moral struggle, and psychological intrigue. This part of our chat is going to be a deep dive, so settle in. Could you give us a thorough summary of the story? We'll take our time here, as this is what so many readers want to know more about.
With pleasure. Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde centers on the respectable Dr. Henry Jekyll, a London physician of standing, who becomes fascinated by the dual nature of mankind, the notion that every individual houses elements of both good and evil. By concocting a special serum, Dr. Jekyll transforms into the brutish, morally unhinged Mr. Edward Hyde. Hyde personifies the suppressed vices lurking beneath Jekyll's outward respectability. The novella follows the escalating tension between Jekyll's dignified persona and the unrestrained depravity of Hyde. The story is told through the eyes of various characters, notably Mr. Utterson, Jekyll's lawyer friend, who unravels the sinister secret at the heart of Jekyll's transformation.
This story has had such an impact that people commonly use Jekyll and Hyde as a way of describing someone with a split personality, or a stark contradiction in behavior. Could you highlight any pivotal scenes we should pay particular attention to when reading?
Certainly. There's a moment when Mr. Hyde first appears, violently trampling a girl in the street. This abrupt cruelty introduces the audience to Hyde's unremorseful evil. Another pivotal scene is when Dr. Jekyll resolves, initially, to separate his darker urges from his better nature, hoping to purify himself. But ironically, the effect is the opposite. Instead of destroying his dark impulses, he emboldens them. Each transformation from Jekyll to Hyde further weakens the Doctor's ability to control his monstrous alter ego. The final sequence, when Jekyll's letter is discovered, is deeply telling. It unveils the layers of guilt, horror, and ultimately the tragic downfall that arises from meddling with the boundaries between good and evil.
It's clear why readers and critics alike find this tale so intriguing. We see the interplay of societal expectations, moral accountability, and the primal urges that lurk beneath. Now, I'd love to know, what inspired you to write this? Where did the core concept originate?
Many influences converged. I was long fascinated by the idea of identity and the moral struggles we all face. There's also a particular Scottish preacher's sermon that haunted me, which discussed the deep duplicity of human nature. Plus, I had a vivid nightmare, fevered, really, where I witnessed a man transforming from a benign figure into a horrifying creature. Upon waking, I hastily began drafting what would become the novella. The story was also shaped by the repressive norms of Victorian society, where outward respectability often concealed private sins.
That's fascinating. So a nightmare, moral philosophy, and Victorian repression all contributed. Was there a real-life model for Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde? Some authors draw on actual individuals for their characters.
There wasn't a direct person that served as a blueprint for Hyde. However, Dr. Jekyll's respectable exterior was certainly influenced by my observations of middle-class professionals in Edinburgh and London, people who maintained a flawless social facade, yet struggled with hidden temptations. I suspect bits and pieces of those personalities made their way into Dr. Jekyll.
One reason this work resonates so powerfully is because it touches on universal themes. Anyone can understand grappling with one's darker impulses. What do you believe the overarching theme is, if you had to condense it?
At its heart, the novella underscores the dual nature of man, our angelic aspirations and our demonic appetites. We can't simply isolate good from evil in neat, separate boxes. If we try, we risk unleashing chaos, as Jekyll does. Another theme is the self-destructive power of secrets. By keeping his experiments hidden, Jekyll deprives himself of the help and counsel he desperately needs, leading to tragic consequences.
From your perspective, how did society react when it was first published? Did people embrace it right away, or was there controversy?
It sparked intense interest almost immediately. Critics found the story shockingly dark, yet they also praised the writing. Readers were both horrified and enthralled by the moral implications. The book sold exceptionally well, and it continues to be adapted into plays, films, and various media. Some called it sensational, while others lauded its psychological depth. My intention was never just to shock. I wanted to provoke thought about the moral complexities within us all.
And provoke thought you did. It's a work that still resonates in modern discourse, especially when we talk about the complexities of human nature. Speaking of modern times, I'm sure our audience is brimming with questions. Let's transition now to our audience Q&A segment. First, we have a few questions that came in by email. Are you ready for them? Let me pull up our first email. This one's from Daniel in Boston. Daniel writes, Mr. Stevenson, you traveled widely across the globe. Did any specific location directly influence the eerie atmosphere of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde?
An interesting question. While the setting is distinctly London, I must admit that the labyrinthine streets and foggy atmosphere reflect my impressions of Edinburgh as much as the British capital. My Scottish roots crept in. Edinburgh's old town, with its narrow closes and hidden courtyards, gave me a sense of lurking shadows and clandestine deeds, which certainly fueled the Gothic overtones.
That is amazing insight. Thank you, Daniel. I hope that satisfies your curiosity. Next, we have an email from Charlotte in Seattle. Charlotte asks, when you wrote Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, did you ever imagine it would become this iconic symbol of duality, or did that catch you by surprise?
I certainly hoped it would make an impact, but I had no inkling it would endure so persistently in popular culture. It was, indeed, a pleasant surprise. I suppose the themes of duality and moral conflict are so universal that the story transcended its Victorian origins.
Wonderful. Thanks for the question, Charlotte. Now, our next email is from Santiago in Mexico City. He writes, if you had modern technology at your disposal, do you think Dr. Jekyll would have ended differently? Perhaps with scientific advancements, the potion might have been perfected?
Oh, dear, with modern technology, Dr. Jekyll might have subjected his serum to rigorous clinical trials, or at least peer review. Yet I suspect the underlying moral dilemma would remain. Tampering with the essence of human nature still invites peril. Technology doesn't erase the fundamental question of good versus evil within us.
All right, fascinating answers. Now, I'd love to turn to our live audience here. Who among you has a question for Mr. Stevenson? I see a hand right there in the third row. I'm heading toward you now. Actually, let me maneuver through the seats without tripping. If I fall, kindly edit that out later, folks. Phew, made it in one piece. Hello there. May I ask your name and what you'd like to ask our distinguished guest? Okay, yes, I'm hearing you. Great question. Let me bring that back to Mr. Stevenson. So, Mr. Stevenson, our friend here is Patricia, and she wants to know, if you had never battled chronic illness, do you think your works would be fundamentally different, particularly in their darker tones? Perhaps you'd have focused on lighter subject matter?
Patricia, that's a perceptive inquiry. My health ordeals profoundly shaped my worldview, heightening my awareness of mortality and existential dread. Perhaps without the specter of illness, I'd have written differently. But truly, adversity often fosters creativity. It forces us to scrutinize life's paradoxes. In short, yes, my oeuvre might have lacked some of its tension and depth without those personal struggles.
Thank you, Patricia, for that intriguing question. Anyone else? All right, I see a hand in the back. I'm heading there now. On my way, let me just say, this crowd looks like they're ready for an after-party. Can we get a round of applause for yourselves? Hey there, mind telling me your name and what your question is? Right, I see. Oh, interesting. Yes, I'm with you. Let me walk this back to Mr. Stevenson. So this is Marcus asking, what authors or writings influenced your style the most? And do you see echoes of those influences in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde?
Marcus, splendid query. Among my influences were William Shakespeare and Sir Walter Scott, the latter being a fellow Scot whose historical novels enthralled me in my youth. Edgar Allan Poe's Gothic flair also left an impression, especially in terms of atmosphere and psychological tension. I suspect if you read my works closely, you'll discern the subtle footprints of these literary giants.
Brilliant. Thank you, Marcus. Let's take one last audience question, shall we? Who's next? Yes, you with the enthusiastic wave. I'm heading over. I feel like I'm training for a marathon weaving through these rows. If I keep this up, I'll be as fit as an explorer in no time. Okay, let's hear your name and question. Aha, yes, that's a lovely query, Elizabeth. Let me relay it back to our guest. So, Mr. Stevenson, this is Elizabeth. She wants to ask, what is your personal view on the responsibility of an author toward society? Should writers merely entertain, or do they have a moral duty as well?
Elizabeth, an excellent topic. I believe writers inevitably reflect and, at times, challenge the morals of their society. While entertainment is important, it's part of what draws people to read, there is also a moral element. Literature can illuminate truths, question injustices, and inspire empathy. In my case, I never strove to preach, but I did hope to make readers contemplate the light and darkness within us all.
Elizabeth, thank you for that wonderful question, and thanks to everyone out there. Let me just scoot back to the stage. Pardon me, everyone, watch your toes.
Take your time. We don't want any accidents.
I appreciate your concern. All right, I'm back on stage safe and sound. Thank you all for your engaging questions. And Mr. Stevenson, thank you for taking the time to answer so thoughtfully.
I'm delighted to share my thoughts. It's quite invigorating to see such lively curiosity.
Before we wrap, I have a few personal questions I'd like to sneak in. The first is, who or what would you say influenced you the most? And how did that shape your creativity?
I drew influence from many sources. My family, especially my father's moral convictions, the raw beauty of Scotland, the adventurous spirit of travel, and certain literary icons like Shakespeare and Scott. All of these elements blended to forge my particular style, blending romantic adventure with moral introspection.
Thank you. Next question. If you could suddenly appear in modern times, what do you think would shock you the most?
Oh, many things, I'm sure. Planes, automobiles, the internet. The sheer speed at which information travels would boggle my 19th-century mind. Also, the shift in societal norms, such as more open discussions of personal matters and mental health. It would be a remarkable leap from my era.
And finally, how do you view your legacy from today's vantage point?
I feel a mixture of pride and humility. It pleases me that people still connect with my stories, especially Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The moral questions remain pertinent. I hope my legacy is that I reminded people of the complexity and wonder of being human, that we are, all of us, both explorers and dreamers, wrestling with our own dualities.
That sums it up so beautifully. Now, let us reflect on our conversation today. We delved into your early life in Edinburgh, the expectations of your family, your challenges with illness, and how they shaped your resilient spirit. We explored the haunting premise of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, from the moral complexities to the atmospheric gloom, to the universal truths about human nature. We've also heard how you found inspiration in nightmares, Victorian society, and personal observations. Finally, we enjoyed a lively Q&A with our audience.
Yes, indeed. It's been a pleasure revisiting these memories and hearing such stimulating questions from yourself and the audience.
We truly appreciate you taking the time to share your experiences, insights, and humor with us. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give him another round of applause as he makes his way off stage.
Thank you all for your kindness. I bid you farewell, and may your travels, literal or imaginative, be ever thrilling.
Thank you, Mr. Robert Louis Stevenson. And to all of you out there in the audience and listening at home, a huge thank you for being such a wonderful community. Give yourselves one more round of applause. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please be sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment. We want to hear your thoughts, and your support means the world to us. Remember, you can always revisit this chat if you got distracted. We do love that listen while you live vibe, but sometimes a moment or two can slip by. Check out the Background Interview channel's podcast playlist for easy access to all our episodes. I personally love to replay them when I need a boost of inspiration. Believe me, there's always something new to discover or reflect upon. Anyway, that wraps up our show for today. Thank you all for tuning in, and I hope you'll join us next time for more fun, insight, and maybe even some comedic cooking mishaps from my side. Until then, take care, stay curious, and we'll see you on the next exciting episode of Background Interview. This is Lily signing off. Goodbye.